Hola, Team Bio. Welcome to your first screencast of the spring. Welcome to Introduction to... Oh, sorry, that's my dog. She's coughing in the background. Introduction to Genetics. So today we talked a little bit about evolution and came up with a working definition of evolution was that it's the change in the number of, or the percentage of, heritable traits, so the change in heritable traits, heritable traits being traits that can be passed on to the next generation, as opposed to a trait that is developed over the course of the lifetime of the individual. For example, going to the gym and increasing your muscle mass is not a heritable trait that won't be passed on to your offspring. So the change in heritable traits of populations over time. And again, this is key here. Individuals do not evolve. We're all dealt a certain genetic hand at birth, and we cannot change our genetics. But populations and the frequency of genes can and does change over time. And that's really what evolution is. So in order to understand all of this, evolution and genetics, we have to go back to our big four. So really quickly here, as you all know and remember well, I'm sure, we discussed in pretty good detail in the fall term 3 out of the big four, and we talked about carbs, we talked about fats and lipids, and we spent a good amount of time talking about proteins as well. And the one of the big four that we didn't talk a lot about was nucleic acid. And this is the genetic material. This is what we're going to be focusing on today and into the future as we keep discussing genetics. Okay, so to start out, the basic building block of a nucleic acid is a nucleotide. And I'm going to draw the structure of a nucleotide for you right here. And a nucleotide is composed of 3 basic important units. Number 1, we have a 5-carbon sugar. Number 2, we have a nitrogenous base, or just a nitrogen base. You can call it either one. And the last piece is a phosphate group. Now, so this is the nucleotide, and you should understand that every nucleotide has this structure. Each one has a phosphate group, each one has a 5-carbon sugar, and each one has a nitrogen base as well, but you need to know that there are a couple different types of nitrogen bases. So this is constant, and this will always be a nitrogen base, but it will be variable in that nitrogen base. It's kind of similar to talking about amino acids. Amino acids have those variable R groups. Well, nitrogen bases are like that as well. They are variable themselves. So, yeah, let's just get to it. I'm going to paste in here a picture of DNA and RNA. And before I do that, I guess just to say, so we have nucleic acid. Whoops. Okay, we have nucleic acids, but there are 2 different types of nucleic acids within this category. We have the RNA and the DNA. And RNA and DNA are both composed of nucleotides, but they have slightly different structures, and we'll talk about that in a second. I'm going to just paste in a picture here. Okay, so here we have our RNA and our DNA, and let's just zoom in and talk about the RNA for 1 second. So, as you can see here, actually this is kind of hard to see. I'm going to give you something that will hopefully make this a little easier. Okay, so here we have our nucleotide from before, and it's kind of hard to see here, but these little stick-like things represent the nitrogen base, and this gray strand represents a chain of these guys, the sugar phosphate backbone. And I'm gonna just copy this for a second and paste it below. So if you can imagine, or you don't even have to imagine, just look at, this is a lot, because I shrunk it down, it's now a lot bigger. But if we joined all these nucleotides together, we'd get a chain of RNA. So that's kind of give you a taste of, you can see that this represents this gray sugar phosphate backbone right here, and the sticks, again, represent the nitrogen bases. So, RNA is composed of 4 different types of bases. We've got cytosine, guanine, adenine, and uracil. And they form a long, single-stranded chain. And this is in comparison to the DNA, which forms a double-stranded helix. So, for example, if we were to take this, paste it over here, like so. This is a single strand of DNA, but then we'd have to add another side and then match up the nitrogen bases, and that would form our double-stranded DNA. Here it's important to note that the bonds holding the nucleotides together here are covalent, and likewise the same bonds over here are also covalent. But the bonds between the bases in the double-stranded DNA are H bonds. Hydrogen bonds are not quite as strong. Okay, sorry, I had to pause this to teach my class up at the KC, and I completely forget where I was. Let me see. I think I was probably talking about the bonding structure, because I see I've written covalent and H bonds. So the important thing to note here is this is single-stranded, double-stranded. Covalent bonds hold this chain together, but H bonds hold the double-stranded piece of DNA together. Also important to note that while DNA and RNA share 3 out of the 4 bases in common, so cytosine, guanine, adenine, in both of them, DNA has thymine, while RNA has uracil. And this is going to come up to be very important later as we talk about transcription and translation, which you know about slightly because you did a screencast at the beginning of the year. But this is all part of what's called the central dogma of biology. And this central dogma tells us that DNA is transcribed into RNA, which is then translated into protein. And a useful way of thinking about this is that the DNA is like the book that holds the information, and the protein is like the action. So for example, if you wanted to build a house, you might read a book on framing, and that would be the information, the DNA, and then the protein would be the final house that you create. So the DNA is transcribed into RNA, which is translated into protein, and then the protein ultimately leads to enzymes which are going to lead to traits and behaviors that we see in organisms. Okay, so this is kind of the connection here of or between evolution and genetics, because we see all evolutionary change must be heritable. Oops, how do I undo? And point. So all evolutionary change is heritable change, and remember the heredity is encoded in the DNA. And we're going to talk more in the future about how the DNA is actually holding that information and how it becomes protein. So this whole process right here. Okay, that is it for today, and I will see you in class tomorrow.